If Twitter is anything to go by, the PSI Conf 2020 hashtag is about to blow up, and it wouldn't surprise me if we end up trending #1 in advance of our next keynote. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Ahmed Hankir, Academic Clinical Fellow in General Adult Psychiatry at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience at King's College London, or to anyone on Twitter, as he's better known to me, as the Wounded Healer. So Dr. Hankir is the recipient of the Royal College of Psychiatry Foundation Doctor of the Year and Royal College of Psychiatry Core Psychiatric Trainee of the Year awards. And that award marks the highest level of achievement in psychiatry in the UK. So when I was thinking about our keynotes for the conference, I was also thinking that at a time when division has been rife in our society, one of the divisions that I struggle perhaps the most with is the perception, or perhaps at times I would argue even lazy stereotype, that there is a never-ending war between psychology and psychiatry for primacy in mental health. And I believe we have much, much more in common than that which divides us. And at our core, we are all healers, and many of us wounded healers, including myself and Dr. Hankir. And I think while sometimes we will differ in our ideologies, what I believe we will never differ in is the desire to heal hurt, trauma, and suffering. And that's really what unites all healing professions. And as Dr. Hankir has pointed out, Jung proclaimed that it's our own hurt which gives us the measure of the power to heal. Yet, despite this, there remains a huge amount of stigma, shame attached to psychological problems, particularly in mental health care professionals. So in this keynote, Dr. Hankir will harness the power of performing arts and storytelling to trace his recovery journey from suicidal service user with mental illness to Royal College of Psychiatrists award-winning doctor. And this keynote will aim to engage, entertain, educate, empower, and I have no doubt it will do all of those things. Dr. Hankir, my friend, over to you.
Wow, Dr. Smith, I'm speechless. I'm so happy to see you. Because we've been exchanging messages, haven't we? And I can hardly contain my glee. What a huge honor. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to share this platform with you and the other eminent speakers. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yep.
And see my slides? Yeah. So let's do this. Okay. Some of you may be disengaged. Oh, and by the way, if you were thinking this, you better think again. So here goes. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Now, blessed is he who, in the name of charity and goodwill, shepherds the weak through the valley of the darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brother. And you will know that I am below when I lay my vengeance upon thee. I've got one thing to say. King Kong right here, he ain't got shit on me. Are you still disengaged? I like to think there is method in my madness. If Ezekiel 25:17 from Pulp Fiction doesn't galvanize you, I don't know what will. Good afternoon. I really want to emphasize it's such an honor for me to deliver the keynotes at the Psychological Society of Ireland. I used to live in Dublin. My father used to work at the Coombe Hospital. He's an obstetrician, and I have really fond memories of when I was a child. So yeah, this is like, I'm feeling it right here. I'm feeling it right here in my heart. Okay, so the aims, moving swiftly on, the aims of this presentation. I want to demonstrate the colossal power of the performing arts and storytelling in healthcare and education. Highlight the epidemic of psychological problems in healthcare professionals and students, and discuss and describe the role that experts by personal and professional experience, aka wounded healers, play in reducing mental health related stigma, and present data from pilot studies on challenging mental health related stigma in healthcare professionals and students. Right, this presentation will be identifying the merits of autobiographical narrative, and so by definition I will be making reference to myself in my own autobiographical narrative. I hope you don't mind. I'm very proud of the goals that I've achieved in my life, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to share my experiences with you. Now, I stake no claim in being master of the phenomenon that has seized me. If in the event you experience psychological distress in any of its many forms, the best recourse is to seek professional help. Reminds me of a quote by Sir William Osler: "The physician who doctors himself has a fool for a patient." And there's another quote from Carl Jung: "Show me a sane man and I will cure him." That really resonates with me. Right, my talk will be making reference to intense experiences in my life, which may or may not evoke uncomfortable feelings and emotions, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So again, to quote Carl Jung, everything that annoys us about other people can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. And lastly, unapologetically, it's going to be dramatic, which is so much fun for me, and I really hope you enjoy it too. Now, it is our contention that we can harness the colossal power of the performing arts and storytelling to entertain and engage people. And once engaged, we can inspire them to deconstruct and reformulate perceptions of madness and psychiatry, not based on myths and sensationalism, but based on the facts and on evidence derived from empirical research. But what is mental health? What is mental health? Simply put, there is no health without mental health. Mental health influences how we feel, think, talk, and behave. It influences our mood, our memory, our motivation, our modus operandi. We are utterly beholden to the power and mercy of our minds. Now, people who experience psychological problems often suffer and struggle terribly, so much so that our suffering and our struggling can drive us to ending that which is most precious, human life itself. We know that every 40 seconds, someone, somewhere out there dies by suicide, and suicide is the biggest killer of people under 35 in the UK. To emphasize, mental illness is a factor that contributes to suicidal behaviors. Yet, and many mental illnesses are preventable. People are dying, and this simply can't continue. That's why I'm outraged. That's why I'm indignant. Now is not the time to be quiet. Now, granted, my approach is not conventional, but I make no apologies for not conforming with the status quo. We must disrupt, rock the boat, be audacious, be tenacious. You can be an agent of social change. You can make a difference. And we're inviting you to join our cultural revolution to erase the stigma attached to mental health difficulties. A cultural revolution that is gaining global traction and momentum. Now, this is my tribute to tonight's Move Thinking. The gauntlet has been thrown. Try and trace the thread in our train of thoughts, if you will. Ours is a world of metaphor, intrigue, fantasy and defeat. Now, my presentation isn't going to delve into the neurobiology and the neuroscience of mood disorder, because to be honest with you, I find that really boring, and I don't want you all to be snoring. What I want to do is demonstrate what night smooth thinking is in the context of an artistic temperament. There is this seductive notion, controversial and contentious though it may be, that there's an association between craziness and creativity, between profound oscillations in moods and the artistic temperament. I also want to provide you with an insight into what I call drama therapy. Who needs psychotropic medication when I can deliver this performance every now and then? But there is some truth in that. Delivering this performance is therapeutic and empowering and cathartic, and there are no adverse effects that I've noticed so far anyway. Okay, so what's night smooth thinking? So Professor Nancy Andreasen, former editor of the American Journal of Psychiatry, she argues that night smooth thinking is not the hallmark of mental illness, but in the context of creativity is synonymous with lateral thinking. So in psychiatry, it's a thought disorder characterized by discourse consisting of a sequence of unrelated or remotely related ideas. Like the sentence I'm uttering now has no kind of logical connection with the preceding sentence, like a non sequitur. Now, despair not if the meaning still eludes you, because I'm going to demonstrate what night mood thinking is in the context of an artistic temperament. Remember, there's that seductive notion of there being an association between craziness and creativity. So I'm going to outstretch my hand, and I dare you all to reach out and grasp it if you so will. Allow me to transport you to a different time and place. Of course, there is a caveat. Before we embark on this odyssey to oblivion and beyond, you might want to fasten your seatbelts, because night mood thinking is a bumpy ride, especially when the tour is a passionate Arab. So it's 7th century AD, and we are in the bazaar in the Arabian Peninsula. Merchants have traveled from far and wide to barter frankincense and silk. The marketplace is heaving with people. But wait just one moment, there's some commotion in the corner. The poet has taken to the pulpit. Bread and water do the poet have in Hakim's house, where verse and prose are nightly put to slaughter. And the bread, I swear, over there is thinner than the water. Open a space, you love it, the poetry. To Mark Smith, winning and rich, patron of the arts, when Mark invites the poet in, their joyous kiss and love is kin, where wines and cakes abound, the skills of verse are found. All revels and all songs begin when Mark Smith invites the poet in. I can be your wingman, Mark, any day. Man, free thinker. Do you imagine you alone think in this world where life is blazing forth in all things? You are free to avail yourself of the universe that has gone missing in your prescription. Once upon my midnight reading, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while another nearly napping, suddenly there came a cat of Adam, suddenly gently rapping on my chamber door. This simplicity I must have tapped on my chamber door, only this and nothing more. Oh! Oh! So you think the darkness is your ally. You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the lights until I was already a man. By then it was nothing but blinding to me. The shadows betray you because they belong to me. Let me tell you something, Miriam, about a man's heart. It is a wretched thing. It isn't like a mother's womb. It won't bleed. It won't stretch to make room for you. Remember that. I have seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will disappear like these tears in the rain. It's time to die. Nice move thinking, ladies and gents, in the context of an artistic temperament and an insight into what I call drama therapy. You know that song by the British band Verve? The drugs don't work. Well, they didn't work for me. But what worked for me was reenacting scenes from films, spoken word poetry. All of that falls under the remit of art therapy. Moving swiftly on. It ain't easy being a medical student. A systematic review and meta-analysis on the mental health of medical students published in JAMA in 2016 revealed that 27% of the 150,000 respondents reported depressive symptoms and 11% experienced suicidal ideation. It's true. Doctors are human too. Tate Shanafelt and colleagues published a paper in The Lancet revealing that physician burnout and emotional exhaustion have reached epidemic levels. And this is like 4 years before the pandemic. Globally, the pool prevalence of depression and depressive symptoms in physicians is 29% greater than the general population. A systematic review revealed that the suicide rate in physicians is 28 to 40 per 100,000, which is more than double that of the general population. We know that in the US alone, 400 doctors die by suicide every year. This is a statement from a colleague of mine at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Not only are medical professionals at higher risk of suicide than the general population, but they also disproportionately suffer from the stigma of seeking help. And a survey of over 2,100 female physicians who met the diagnostic criteria for a mental disorder revealed that 50% were reluctant to seek professional help because of fear of stigmatization. 50% of female physicians who met the diagnostic criteria for a mental disorder were reluctant to seek professional help because of fear of exposure to stigmatization. Now, there are three broad approaches to mental health. There's proactive, so prevention is better than intervention. And cliche though it may be, it's true. A healthy body is a healthy mind, but it doesn't matter how many Zumba classes you attend unless we address some of the systemic failures in healthcare. For example, the imbalance between provision and demand, workforce shortages, PPE, then mental health difficulties will continue to be problematic in the workforce. Then we have reactive. So you are a student, for example, and you have developed psychological problems, and you are referred to a counselor on campus for therapy. And the third approach, and the most challenging approach, is instigating systemic change, challenging that culture of shame and reducing the stigma that permeates the National Health Service, for example. Now, Irving Goffman defines stigma as a deeply discrediting attribute that reduces the bearer from a whole and usual person to a tainted and discounted one. The individual is thus disqualified from full social acceptance, a deeply discrediting attribute. What is that deeply discrediting attribute? Now, there's a term in the literature called intersectionality, when you have multiple deeply discrediting attributes. And we know that Islamophobia is a growing problem in the West. So being a Muslim can be a deeply discrediting attribute. Being from a Black, Asian, and minority ethnic background can be a deeply discrediting attribute. And having mental illness can also be a deeply discrediting attribute. And so that's the triple stigma, the triple whammy, the layer upon layer upon layer of stigma, and unsurprisingly, outcomes are poor in this group. Now, historically, a stigma was a scar from a burn or cut to the skin of Greek criminals or traitors. The mutilation was a sign of disgrace, indicating that these people should be avoided and shunned. Stigma still persists today in the attitudes and behaviors towards those who have mental health difficulties. We see a fundamental divide between the manic mind and the asthmatic lung, as if those who experience psychological problems do so out of their own making, and as such do not deserve the same kind of empathy we would ordinarily show to someone suffering from another chronic condition like cancer, for example. This is Trisha Goddard, a British television personality. She was diagnosed with breast cancer and depression. She described both experiences as horrible. But when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she was inundated with get well soon cards. The moment news leaked out that she was admitted into a psychiatric ward following a nervous breakdown, not a peep. And certainly no cards. With breast cancer, people ran towards her with open arms and hugged her. With depression, people ran away. Stigma. Stigma and a culture of shame are formidable barriers to psychological services, and consequently, many mental health care professionals and students with psychological problems continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. I must reiterate, many psychological professionals and students with psychological problems continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. And if that was physical health, there would be outrage. This is Dr. Miles Christie. He was terrified that he would lose his job if he spoke openly about his mental health. And he tragically killed himself last year, survived by his wife and his 2 children, and this statement was released by his brother, Phil Christie. There is a stigma surrounding doctors and mental health. This is Dr. Daksha Emson, a brilliant psychiatrist with bipolar affective disorder, who tragically killed herself and her 3-month-old baby daughter, Freya, during a psychotic episode. She doused her with kerosene and set her alight. An independent inquiry into their deaths concluded that they were the victims of stigma in the National Health Service. Mental health-related stigma is rampant in the NHS. If there is one take-home message, let it be this one, that stigma is killing people. Stigma is killing people. Sources of stigma. The 2008 Stigma Shout survey of 4,000 people using mental health services and carers revealed that healthcare professionals were a common source of stigma reported by people with mental illness. And which specialty was the most stigmatizing? Psychiatry. I'm flabbergasted. You would think that the psychiatrist would provide you with a sanctuary, but the opposite is true. And stigma is like mental illness in the sense that those who suffer from it are often in denial. So I delivered a grand rounds, the wounded healer, at a Ivy League university in the United States. And the cameraman's assistant, they took footage of the grand rounds. He gravitated towards me afterwards, and he embraced me. He has no background in mental health. He just said, I want to thank you. And I met with the head of the Department of Psychiatry, a professor of psychiatry, in his office. And when I opened my mouth, his face contorted as if I was about to contaminate him with some ghastly disease. He was disgusted by me, the self-proclaimed expert in mental health who likes to isolate himself in the lofty confines of an ivory tower. And so if I'm in a crisis situation, am I going to go to this professor of psychiatry, or am I going to go to this cameraman's assistant? Who is going to dignify me? Who will I feel safe with when I am vulnerable? Are you going to be a source of stigma? Or are you going to engage in introspection and be brutally honest with yourself, identify any unconscious stigma or biases, and challenge the unconscious or conscious stigma and biases? It's up to you. The choice is yours. And it's not easy. Just because I have lived experience, it doesn't mean that I'm not a potential source of stigma. We have to be vigilant and guard ourselves against stigma and discrimination and bias. Stigma is an umbrella term that can be deconstructed into three main components: problems of knowledge, ignorance; problems of attitude, prejudice; and problems of behaviors, discrimination. Now, this is important when you want to operationalize stigma and when you want to evaluate anti-stigma campaigns. There are validated psychometric stigma scales in each of these domains. How do we challenge stigma? Three broad approaches: through protest, through education, and through social contact. When we meet people who have lived or living experience of psychological problems. Now, Patrick Corrigan and colleagues conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis on challenging the public stigma of mental illness. And they concluded that the most effective way of reducing stigma is when you make social contact with someone who has lived or living experience of mental health difficulties. Because when we meet these people, we discover that these people have hopes and dreams and vulnerabilities and strengths like everyone else, that we are human beings. How do we react to public stigma? Three broad approaches. We can internalize, and we develop self-stigma. We can be indifferent. We don't really care. And there's a third group. People who become energized, and they develop a righteous indignation. They want to be agents of social change. They want to contribute to the cultural revolution to erase the stigma attached to mental health difficulties. Now, many people with mental illness often have to choose between concealment and disclosure. So coming out proud, COP, it's now known as the Honest, Open and Proud, HOP, is a program that offers support with making this difficult decision. So an RCT on COP published in BJ Psych revealed that it had immediate positive effects on disclosure and stigma stress-related variables. Now, this is a manual that was developed by my dear friend, Professor Katrina Skior, a psychologist at UCL. She co-produced this with Patrick Corrigan. And this is specifically for mental health professionals. So you saw one of my favorite two lines in poetry ever from Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night, but rage against the dying of the light. So I've tweaked the words because it's the digital age. Do not go gentle into that good night, but tweet against the dying of the light. And that's how I connected with Mark. And there's an online community who are incredibly supportive. So if you're a mental health professional, you have lived or living experience of mental health difficulties, you can refer to this manual, and it will provide you with guidance. So, for example, you might decide to share on social media. But the question is, How much do you share? What do you share? And that's the great thing. And to who do you share? Do you share online? Do you share to your employer? Do you share to your family and friends? And that's what this manual does. It provides you with guidance. See, here we have Prince Harry. He's an expert by experience. He was honest and open about his difficulties with his psychological problems, precipitated by the death of his mother, Princess Diana. And a mental health charities report, there was a surge in the number of people who contacted their information line. Mind, for example, report that there was a 38% increase in the number of people who contacted their helpline. And the point I'm making is that we have the power. Experts by experience have the power, to reduce mental health related stigma. This is Sir John Kirwan, affectionately known as JK. He was a winger for the New Zealand All Blacks, and as many of us know, they dominated World Rugby, and arguably they continue to dominate World Rugby. Now, he is not a member of the royal family, but Kiwis revere him as such. Now, yesterday was International Men's Day, right? Why is it? Why is it that the male to female suicide ratio is 3-to-1? There is a toxic culture of masculinity, this kind of macho bravado that we need to challenge. A man cannot express his emotions. We have to bottle it up, right? And I hypothesize that is a factor that contributes to the 3-to-1 male to female suicide ratio. So what did JK do? He wrote an autobiography. All Blacks Don't Cry. Well, they're not supposed to, but they do. And he was honest and open about his experiences living with major depressive disorder. He collaborated with ministers at the New Zealand government. It was a national governmental campaign led by JK and the charity Like Mine. New Zealand are world leaders at reducing mental health related stigma. Professor Sir Graham Thornycroft conducted a study and revealed that this campaign was associated with reductions in mental health related stigma. Now, the health humanities has been described as the application of art and literature to medicine. This is one of my favorite books ever by Oliver Sacks. And he emphatically exclaims that in order to restore the human subject at the center, the suffering, afflicted, fighting human subject, we have to deepen a case history into a narrative or tale. What is the suffering behind the symptom? So here is Carl Jung. Carl Jung, he used the wounded healer, or he described the wounded healer archetype in relation to himself. For Jung, it is our own hurt that gives us our measure of our power to heal. It is our own hurt that gives us our measure of our power to heal. And my interpretation of that, and the beauty of this is that it defies a single interpretation. My interpretation of that is that the deeper our wounds, the more empathic healers we become. Now, I'm not saying that you have to experience psychological problems to be empathic. Of course not. Of course not. But the point I'm making is that these experiences are not entirely negative or disadvantageous. I mean, on the contrary, I would say that certainly in my experience, it's advantageous. Now, this is an exposition by Dr. Claire Polkinghorne entitled Doctors Go Mad Too. I'm going to read it out to you verbatim. So as a psychiatrist, I had hoped that I was pretty good at empathizing with my patients. However, the last 9 months of my life has taught me more about mental illness than years of clinics and ward rounds and domiciliary visits or reading the psychiatric literature. She was diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, detained under the Mental Health Act, and she was admitted onto a psychiatric ward where she remained for 6 weeks. Now, if you read the autobiographical narratives of wounded healers, of doctors who have lived the living experience of psychological problems, a motive or a recurrent theme is that we have become more empathic, we have become more insightful, and we have become more driven. And not only has my living experience made me a better doctor, it's made me a better human being. So this is my autobiographical narrative. There I am, 10th of July 2000. I had to leave my family behind me in Lebanon when I was 17 years old. The situation back then over there was not good at all. This was during the aftermath of the brutal and the bloody civil war in Lebanon, and employment and poverty rates were high. Saying goodbye to your parents when you're a teenager is not easy. So there we were in Beirut International Airport, all crying inconsolably, but I didn't really have any other choice. Now I arrived in England and naively expected that I would just waltz into university and that the academic community would embrace me. After all, I graduated top of the school I attended in Lebanon, so of course this would naturally happen. The reality was that my qualifications were not recognized, and so I ended up cleaning floors as a janitor and stacking shelves as a stock advisor in a supermarket. I was working 70 hours a week on minimum wage to survive. And the calluses on my hands were testament to the toil of my labor. People would approach me when I was working in the Marks and Sparks, and they would ask me, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" So my dream of one day becoming a doctor felt very far-fetched. How did I feel? How did I feel? I mean, legally speaking, I was not even an adult. My mind was still maturing, my brain was still developing, and my heart was still expanding. I saw other people my age living with their parents and preparing for their A-levels. I felt isolated, melancholic, and afraid. Of course I did. But I was fully aware that I had been given a decent shot at life. Unlike many other parts of the world, the UK education is a birthright. And I would admonish myself if I squandered that golden opportunity. I just had to remain focused, be patient, and work hard. So the following year, I enrolled into a sixth form college, and the head of the sixth form at the time asked me what I want to study at university, and I said medicine, and she laughed at my face and scoffed. "It's too difficult. You'll never get in. Choose another course." And she didn't have to say it, but she made me feel like I was this dirty little immigrant with delusions of grandeur. Her words were cutting. I can't deny it. And whenever we'd walk in opposite directions in the corridor, her pride would be so palpable that my gaze would be fixed on the floor. However, I did not allow her to diminish my determination. It felt as if she was resolute, that she wanted to shatter my dreams. I continued to work full-time hours to keep a roof over my head and food in my stomach. This was a constant threat to securing the grades necessary to matriculate into medical school. Looking back, I don't know how I did it. Going to sixth form from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and waking up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning to take the bus to work when it is cold, dark, gloomy, and wet outside. Stacking shelves for 14 hours on a Saturday, then doing the same on a Sunday, and then returning to sixth form on a Monday. I don't know how I did it. Praise be to God. So all of my hard work, sacrifices, and heartache paid off. On the day that the results of the exams were announced, something astonishing occurred. I walked in opposite directions of the head of the sixth form like I usually do. But this time, her gaze was fixed on the floor, and it transpired that I received straight A grades, and I enrolled into Manchester Medical School. My dream of becoming a doctor was starting to come true, and life was amazing. Up until 2006, when I was a medical student. At Manchester in my third year, I woke up one morning to discover that my hometown in Lebanon was bombed. My nightmare turned into a reality. My world turned upside down. I saw harrowing and horrific images of dead bodies strewn on the streets of Lebanon. I feared that my family were among the dead. I couldn't get through to them. Didn't have WhatsApp back then. And unbeknown to me, they were evacuated by the British government. I reacted. I developed a severe episode of mental illness. Now, C.S. Myers and the Lancet said that everyone has a breaking point, weak or strong, cowardly or courageous. And in the immortal oratory of the Joker, insanity is much like gravity. All it takes is a little push. And another, I love some of these lines. Unfortunately, I do believe that it perpetuates some negative stereotypes of people with mental health difficulties, but some of the lines in that film were really powerful. One of them is, the worst thing about having mental illness is that society expects for you to behave as if you don't. So, debilitating though the symptoms of mental illness are, the stigma is far, far worse. I was ostracized, shunned, and dehumanized by people who I thought were my closest companions at the time. Moreover, I was forced to interrupt my studies, and my only source of income from the student loans company was severed. It's not like I could just stay with my parents. They were living in Lebanon. And I was rendered impoverished and hopeless. And I was sinking deeper and deeper into the darkness. Now, in my despair, I contemplated suicide. However, I resisted the urge to act upon these thoughts and impulses because suicide is forbidden in Islam, so my faith was a protective factor. I eventually sought informal support from my imam in my local mosque, and he advised me to seek help from an NHS psychiatrist. I received life-saving treatment and gradually recovered and resumed medical school with a renewed determination and resilience. There was a fire burning in my belly. There was a thunder in my heart to realize my potential. So against all the odds, I qualified as a doctor in 2011. However, the journey had only just begun. I had been rejected and ridiculed and humiliated and disempowered for so long. I was a man on a mission. I was inspired to work above and beyond the call of duty, and my hard work did not go unnoticed. 2011, I was fortunate to receive the Royal College of Psychiatrists Foundation Doctor of the Year, and in 2018, I received the Royal College of Psychiatrists Core Psychiatric Trainee of the Year, which marks the highest level of achievement in psychiatry in the UK. I don't mean to offend anyone, but I think that's not bad for a madman. And there's been a paradigm shift. There's been a paradigm shift at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. I contributed to their Choose Psychiatry campaign, and we're actually reaching out to medical students with mental health difficulties, and we're saying that your experiences are an asset that we embrace and that we welcome you to join our ranks. Now, don't get me wrong, mental health related stigma still exists, even in the corridors of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, but I think we're making some progress. I mean, this is, as I said, a paradigm shift. Okay, so what do we do? We have a story. What do we do? I noticed that when I was a medical student, I didn't receive any teaching on the devastating effects of mental health related stigma. Any anti-stigma intervention has to be evidence-based, and data-driven, and it can't be conventional, according to the Canadian Psychiatric Association. So you approach the experts, and this is Professor Sir Graham Thornycroft, and I had a meeting with him, and he showed me this paper, the key ingredients of anti-stigma programs for healthcare providers. This was a paper by Stephanie Naak and colleagues at the University of Calgary in Canada. 6 key ingredients of anti-stigma program for healthcare providers. One of them is a personal testimony from a trained speaker who has lived experience of mental illness. This is a necessary ingredient. So a recent survey conducted on 302 students enrolled in medical schools throughout the UK revealed that 90% of respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that a doctor with first-hand experience of psychological distress should deliver a talk on medical student mental health. So the Wounded Healer has been described as an innovative method of teaching that blends the power of the performing arts and storytelling with psychiatry. The aims are to entertain, engage, and to educate, to debunk myths, challenge stigma, encourage care seeking, and it's expert by personal and professional experience led. We coined this mnemonic EPPE. Now, as I mentioned, Prince Harry is an expert by experience. That's fantastic. We need to amplify the voices of people who have lived and living experience of psychological problems. But we, EPPEs, wounded healers, must show leadership. And we're not. We haven't been showing leadership. And so that space has been occupied by experts by experience, and that's fantastic. And I want to continue amplifying their voices. But we have professional expertise and personal expertise, and we should be showing leadership, and we're not. And we're not. I mean, there are some people blazing trails in their wake. For example, Professor Jamie Hacker-Hughes, who was former president of the British Psychological Society, who's a dear friend of mine. So there are some people who are showing leadership, but I think a lot more need to. So these are some of the catchy flyers that the students designed. So I approached each medical school as a psychiatry society or a psych SOC, and so I collaborated with them. And so we adopted a bottom-up approach. And I've delivered the Wounded Healer to over 75,000 people in 18 countries and 5 continents worldwide. These are some of the other flyers, which I said very catchy. This is the global footprint of the Wounded Healer. So I continue to encounter resistance. I mean, there's a psychiatrist who claims to be active against stigma, and yeah, he actually blocked me, even though I haven't met him. So he heard about me, and he blocked me on social media. And it hurts. I can't deny it. It hurts. Like I said, I encounter resistance. But when I get feedback like this, when people tell me that I instill hope in their hearts and in their minds, that recovery is a reality for the many and not for the few, it inspires me to continue. So this is kind of, we're living in a COVID-19 world. And evidently, this was supposed to take place in Dublin, unfortunately. And don't get me wrong, it's fantastic that we can continue to have events such as these. But we need to harness, this is an example of virtual contact. It's not face-to-face contact. And this study by Sarah Evans-Lacko and colleagues revealed that digitized short video interventions also had considerable and stable effects at reducing mental health-related stigma. And so they recommend digitized film interventions that facilitate virtual contact between people who don't have lived experience and people who do have lived experience for further research and development. And so we created the Wounded Healer film. I was the protagonist of this film, it was screened at the World Psychiatric Association World Congress. Okay, data from pilot studies. This is Haritha. She was the president for King's College London Psych SOC. She published an editorial for the British Journal of Psychiatry Bulletin, and the title of which is Psych Socks are an untapped resource for recruitment and stigma reduction. So this is an event that was organized by KCL. You can see one of the speakers is Professor Jamie Hacker-Hughes. So this was a single-arm pre-post comparison study. So this was an event comprised of healthcare professionals who themselves have recovered from psychological problems, wounded healers. So the psychometric stigma scales that we used were MAX, RIBS, and CAMI, mental health knowledge schedule for the knowledge domain, reported and intended behavior for the behavior domain, and community attitudes towards the mentally ill for the attitude domain. And higher scores represented less stigmatizing responses. So this is for MAX, knowledge. And you can see there were statistically significant reductions in stigma. And this is for the reported and intended behavior scale, the behavior domain. Again, statistically significant reductions in stigma. And these p-values were very impressive. So you can see, for example, attitudes. The p-value was less than 0.0001. So this is the first intervention study to challenge mental health-related stigma comprised of healthcare professionals who themselves have recovered from mental health problems. So the evidence so far reveals immediate reductions in stigma, but not sustained reductions in stigma. And we hypothesize that wounded healers have the power to reduce mental health-related stigma in the long term. And this study illustrated the power of contact with an EPPE. Obviously, it was fraught with limitations, but it was a single-arm pre-post comparison study. We don't have any longitudinal data. We're hoping to conduct future studies that have a randomized design. This is a dear friend of mine, Andreas Martin. He's a fellow wounded healer, and he's a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine. I'm delighted to share that I have joined forces with Andreas. He is originally from Mexico, and he's such a legend, a very humble man. It was amazing. We've had multiple Zoom meetings. It was we were actually singing in unison. I don't know if you've heard that film Coco, that animated film, and there's that beautiful song "Remember Me," and he's just such an approachable man, and we were singing in unison, "Remember Me." But I'm delighted to share that we approached the Vice Chancellor of the University of Southampton. If I'm not mistaken, Ruby Wax is the Chancellor, and she's a mental health advocate and champion. And we've organized this event. You are not alone, facing mental health head-on, which will be taking place on the 15th of December. You are all invited to attend. 6 speakers, 2 hours, diverse cultural, religious, ethnic, age backgrounds. There's going to be live music. There's going to be spoken word poetry. We've got ethical approval, and all 22,000 students at the University of Southampton have been invited to attend, and we welcome you to attend this event also. So that should hopefully increase the sample size of our study. Countering stigma starts off with the individual by challenging our own prejudices and preconceptions. Those of you experiencing psychological distress in any of its many forms, I know that the world can be a dark and lonely place, but don't give up hope. Please don't give up hope, because effective treatment is available. And recovery is a reality for the many, not for the few. We're not doing enough for people with serious mental illness. I don't want to misinform you and say everyone can recover. We need to do more for these people. But I do want to emphasize that recovery is a reality for the many and not for the few. It's okay not to be okay. Having mental health difficulties is nothing to be ashamed about. As a doctor, as a psychologist, as a mental health care professional, I wish Dr. Miles Christie, do you remember he was terrified that he would lose his job if he spoke honestly and openly about his mental health difficulties, and so he tragically killed himself. I wish he was here with us today. I would reach out to him and I would hold his hand and I would look him in the eye and I would say there is no shame experiencing mental health difficulties as a doctor. There is no shame. And as I said, seeking help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. And effective treatment is available, and recovery is a reality for the many, not for the few. This is my poem that will close. This was delivered at in Lisbon. There were 1,000 medical students. It's the largest medical student conference in Europe. It's called The Conflagration. In my wake, I'm getting very nostalgic now. This brings back very fond memories. So, regard the conflagration in my wake, an inexorable inferno, burning bridge after bridge. Emancipate me from the shackles of my mind. Release me, I beseech thee, from the indignations of my past. Take up the quill, I will, and relate my tale of woe I shall. But wait, an incandescent silver lining. Was it not the mystic Khalil Gibran who proclaimed, the more melancholy carves into your being, the more jubilation it can contain? And even the beauty of birth, even the beauty of birth leaves its own scars. So adorn my face, not with a masquerade, but with a smile that never fades, and patient no more, but healer now I am. And often to the kingdom of the sick I shall foray, with lineament and manner, born at the experience as my instruments of healing. And as I behold my neighbor's gaze, she whispers unto me, you're a good doctor, Dr. Hankir. An unbridled joy just gushes forth from my heart. It's not me who heals you, my dear, but it's you who heals me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. I am both blown away, a little exhausted.
Yeah, you know, it is.
Not
Yes.
just me exhausted by watching. I can't only imagine what it must be like for you to deliver that. But it was pretty much exactly what I expected, what I hoped it was going to be. It was energetic, passionate, genuine, engaging, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's a keynote that's going to live long, long in our memories. So thank you. And just there's a few comments that have come in, not necessarily questions, but I think I need to read them out anyway. My comment on Ahmed: brilliant, brave, and human.
Wow.
I love Dr. Hankir's presentation. His energy is contagious. His subject matter is heroically emotive. I aspire to be this brave and outspoken with regard to mental health stigma. I suppose just maybe on that comment, I think for that person to aspire to be that brave, what would you say to that person about what steps you would need to take to be able to identify in yourself as a therapist, as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, to come out and to disclose openly, I suppose, the difficult experience?
Well, those are beautiful comments. When this moment becomes a memory, it's those comments that I will remember, that will carry me. Because like I said, I continue to encounter resistance, although the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. I think at the level of the individual, if we can overcome self-stigma and if we can be kind to ourselves, cliche though it may be, it's true that we need to show ourselves more compassion, because we punish ourselves, don't we? And we ruminate and we dwell and we self-flagellate. So I think if we can be more compassionate and kind to ourselves and overcome the self-stigma and have that self-belief, because it takes an extraordinary amount of strength to endure psychological problems and distress. So, to really emphasize that point. But you can be an agent of social change. And because if I can, then there's no reason why you can't. So the question is, it's kind of crafting this story, which takes time. I've been doing this now for many years. But also, be kind of confiding on someone that you feel that you can be vulnerable with. And so maybe that's the first step, starting off small, but then kind of reaching out to other groups on other platforms, other stages, and to emphasize, if this is something that I can do, as someone from a Black, Asian, and minority ethnic background with, multiple kind of layers of stigma, and if I can do that, then there's no reason why you can't do that either. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Thank you. And I think it's important that we start to have those conversations early.
Yeah.
I work in child and adolescent mental health services, and sometimes a young person will talk to me with their hopes and their dreams and careers and say that, I had thought or hoped I was going to be a psychologist when I was older, but now I can't. And it's heartbreaking when I ask them why, and I know what's coming, that, because I've been in CAMS, because I've had mental health difficulties, I've thought about suicide, it means I can never do it. And I always try and pass on to them that means they could be an even better psychologist.
Absolutely.
That's not a reason that precludes them. It's something that maybe would project them towards it. But I have got a question about that. To get into our careers in medicine or in psychology, they're very competitive environments. And people have very genuine fears that if they were to be open about their mental health experiences, that it could hamper, I suppose, their career progression. And they're very real fears.
Absolutely.
People?
I think it's deciding when. That's the great thing about this manual by Katerina Skior at UCL, the Honest, Open and Proud Manual for Mental Health Professionals. Because, this is anecdotal, because I'm fortunate to receive these awards, whatever they mean, from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which mark the highest level of achievement in psychiatry in the UK or whatever. And I don't mean to share that to brag or to boast. I think the point I'm making is that not only can we recover, not only can we function, we can be the best at what they do by the college's standards. And there's still that myth that abounds that we will not recover, that will never amount to anything in life. And so people look confused and perplexed when I say to them, I've got lived experience, but I've also got these college awards. So it's like, they have this kind of impulse to stigmatize, and I'm like, before you even vocalize that impulse, I'm like, not a word from you, because by your standards, I'm the best at what I do. For me, it doesn't matter deep down inside, what matters is what the people who receive my care think and how they feel. And if I make them feel dignified and empowered. But I guess the point I'm making is I can fall back on these awards because it feels this is how I live. Okay, there's a tremendous amount of support. I have so many connections on social media, but it does feel like people are looking over my shoulder and just waiting for me to make a mistake, and they're pounced upon me. So I think we need to be prudent, and coming out, being honest, open, and proud has certainly been beneficial for me. I find it empowering, therapeutic, cathartic, but you have to be realistic. And the reality is that mental health stigma continues to exist. So I'm not saying don't be honest, open, and proud. I'm not saying be honest, open, and proud. It's a personal choice. And that's why this manual, I keep referring to this manual, it's a precious resource because it provides you with guidance. And so far, it's been hugely beneficial for me, although recently I do feel like I was stigmatized and it did hurt me. But as I said, to emphasize, the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. And it's just, you feel that, you have these kind of authentic and vulnerable connections. And everyone knows that famous TED talk by Brené Brown, The Power of Vulnerability. Because I think unless we embrace our vulnerability, we can't have these authentic connections with people. And it's interesting because in a clinical context, this is a stage, this is a platform, I can be honest, open about my mental health difficulties. And even in a clinical context, the General Medical Council or the Royal College of Psychiatrists, they're not saying it's forbidden or it's prohibited, but you do a lot more listening than you do talking. But you don't even have to say it explicitly. People have lived their living experience. We don't, give them the credit that they deserve because they can pick up on that. They know your manner, your empathy, the tone of your voice, the look in your eye, your nonverbal communication. They can sense if you have lived the living experience, because, as I said, when you become more empathetic, you become more insightful, and you become more driven. So to kind of emphasize what Mark was saying, that your lived experience is an asset. Don't ever think for a moment that you can't become a psychologist because you have psychological problems. I didn't become the best. And I'm going to say this to the stigmatizers. I'm not saying that there are any stigmatizers tuning in now. This is, whatever, if they happen to come across this recording. I didn't become the best at what I do despite my lived experience. I became the best at what I did because of my lived experience.
Thank you. And actually, it touches just on a question just about recovery, just as you spoke there. How can we get people on board with the idea that recovery is possible? This is the biggest challenge I encounter. In my experience, there's very little belief in recovery and a lot of belief in labels of mental illness.
Yeah.
The feedback I get from people is that the possibility of recovery, that their distress is a life sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why education, the three broad approaches, protest, education, and contact. Education alone is not going to help. We need to empower experts by experience, experts by personal professional experience, because I'll go back to Baksha Ensign, I'll go back to these really tragic cases, Dr. Miles Christie. And it's looking him in the eye, because what comes, in Lebanon we say what comes from the lips, it reaches the ear. What comes from the heart, it reaches the heart. We need to penetrate the limbic system, the part of the brain that regulates those emotions. Because internalizing something, I don't have to explain this, I'm sure you understand this. Internalizing a message cognitively and emotionally, they're two different things. So knowing something and feeling something, they're two different things. And to be able to speak to someone on a level, and with conviction, and with passion, and with humanity, and with humility, and say, look, I believe in you. It's not going to be easy. But I believe in you. I believe in you. And saying that so many times and emphasizing that, I think we can plant the seeds of hope in their hearts and in their minds, and that recovery is a reality. And I appreciate that I didn't think, I never thought I was going to recover. I wish that somebody could say to me, when I was at the throes of profound oscillations in emotion and mood, that you can recover, because I didn't hear that. I wish somebody said to me, because I wouldn't have suffered for so long. And that's why I took 3 years out of my training to deliver the Wounded Healer here, there, and everywhere.
We have a comment here. Fantastic to see Dr. Hankir lead the way for mental health professionals not to hide their concerns. It's okay not to be okay. We're all human, and we must all self-care before we can help others. Have you read the Dr. Adam Kay books, Funny but Realistic Views, the difficulties experienced by doctors?
Yeah. Thank you for your kind comments. Dr. Adam Kay, he's close friends with Dame Claire Gerarda, isn't he? And she leads the practitioner health initiative in the UK. I don't know if you have an equivalent in Ireland. And yeah, Adam, he's self-deprecating, isn't he? He's very, he uses British humor as well. So it's funny. I identify as a proud British Muslim, but I don't feel like kind of his message really resonates with me. And all due respect to Adam, I think he's fantastic. He's as I said, he's self-deprecating. But as somebody from a minority background, and I don't think the voices of people from BAME backgrounds are loud enough. I don't think we're giving a platform to these people. So yeah, I think he's fantastic. I support his work. But okay, for example, I'm a wounded healer, right? I keep on emphasizing I'm Muslim, I'm from a BAME background. A young girl. Okay, you know that film, the Suicide Virgins? Have you heard it before, Mark?
Yes.
You've heard about it before, right?
Yeah.
Remember that young girl that physician was being patronizing towards her? He's like, oh, you're not old enough to know how difficult life can be. You remember that patronizing, condescending comment? And her riposte was genius. When you don't know what it's like to be a young girl with emotional problems, right? Yeah, okay, so I'm the wounded healer. There's a young girl with emotional problems. She's got scars from self-harm injuries up and down her limbs. She doesn't want to hear from the wounded healer. She wants to hear from someone, a survivor, or someone from that background, from a non-BAME background, who's. So I'm going to say, somebody might say, just shut up, and I'll accept that. I'm out of my depth. I'll get off the stage and I'll get someone who is from a background that she can relate to, that she can identify with.
Yeah. And do you know what, I really resonate with that, because I think far too long in therapies, the issues around connection and disconnection is put back onto, well, the client couldn't engage, or
Yeah,
they were being difficult, rather than stepping back and going, that's perfectly okay. You know, if
that's
you
fine.
prefer, that's if whatever works. With kind of that process of self-disclosure, Dr. Hankir, it's been debated for a long time whether we should or we shouldn't, but also within that therapeutic alliance, certainly you can strengthen it. What's your thoughts about when or how much, or that self-reflective piece around when, do you believe, is there a barrier in terms of how much you should or shouldn't within that therapeutic alliance?
I mean, certainly, I don't know about Ireland, but certainly in the UK, there's nothing to stop you. And I forget his name. He did a whole PhD on this at the University of York about, sharing, and because, disclosure has those kind of those criminal connotations, and there's nothing criminal. I was admonished by a fellow wounded hero who said, and in a very constructive way, that, you shouldn't say, because words matter, right? Words are the means to meaning, and for those who are listening, the enunciation of truth, for those of you whose memories of V for Vendetta haven't faded. So in a kind of clinical context, working, at the core phase of the National Health Service, there's nothing to stop me. Like, for example, once we know that people from BAME backgrounds are overrepresented in not just the criminal justice system, but acute mental health services. You go to the psychiatric intensive care unit, and you're like, oh my God, like every single person here is black. It's shocking. It hurts. I mean, that goes beyond overrepresented. These are like, it feels like it's like a crime against humanity. The violation of human rights. The threshold is so low, they'll just detain him because he disagreed with me, right? And so there was a Muslim man, and there's the kind of this really hurts me too, because we make that crude association. If he's Muslim, then he's a terrorist, right? And there's a Muslim man. He was in seclusion, and he was holding a copy of the Quran, and there was acute behavioral disturbance, and it was like, let's bring out the rapid trank. Let's, administer intramuscular haloperidol or whatever. I'm like, okay, you want to slow down there, cowboy? Let me just connect with him, all right? I'll just say, hello, salam, peace be upon you. I see you got a copy of the Holy Quran in your hand. Like, yeah. I'm like, does reciting from the Quran, does that comfort you? He's like, yes, it does. I'm like, yeah, I'm a Muslim too. Let's recite from the Holy Quran together. And he started to cry. Tears of joy streaming down his face. I didn't need to restrain him and use rapid tranquilization. I just connected with him. In that scenario, it just felt right for me to share. Not that I have lived experience. I shared that I'm a Muslim too. Maybe obviously Islam has become racialized, and I'm the complexion of my skin. Maybe he sensed that, and tears of joy were streaming down his face. So I think it depends on the scenario. Your heart, because I let my heart lead me. I mean, don't get me wrong, it got me into trouble sometimes. It's made me vulnerable. Ernest Hemingway, right? Our virtues make us vulnerable. We're often we're often wounded, sometimes destroyed. But still, regardless, that's just me. I can't. That's just, my heart will continue to lead me. And that particular scenario, my heart led me, because I saw this person's human rights were being violated. The threshold for using psychotropic medication is too. I'm not saying we shouldn't use psychiatric drugs, and I think this is where the kind of psychologists and the psychiatrists will clash. But I'm just saying, in that particular scenario, the threshold was far too low to use psychotropic medication. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I suppose it emphasised, the beauty of just connection and the power of connection by whatever way you mean it. If you feel understood, then it's a means of beginning that process of healing.
Oh God!
I'm just going to leave just with two comments, just from some of the people who've been here and privileged to hear you. A truly invigorating presentation full of empathy and heart. Thank you. That was beautiful and transcending and inspiring. Thank you.
Oh, bless you. Oh my God! Wow, that means the world to me.
On behalf of myself, PSI, and all of our members, we want to extend our thanks to you, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today, and we hope we get to see you again soon.
I hope so too, face to face, all of us together.
I hope so. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.